Fania Oz Salzberger, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Can I ask you, because you are an Israeli intellectual and there seems to be a number of your fellow intellectuals starting to, I don't know if question is the right word, but starting to talk about and write about the enormous cost in global acceptance, public opinion, that Israel is suffering right now because of what is happening in Gaza with the death of 30,000 people, you know, starvation, famine, all of those things that you know.
Yes. So, yes, we have not started, actually. We've been at it for quite a while now. It was absolutely clear that a war in Gaza will have a terrible toll, a terrible cost in human suffering in Gaza. And I think many of us knew this from the very beginning. And still we felt, and I still feel as we talk now, that defeating Hamas is wholly necessary. It is morally right. However, this is certainly not the kind of war that I and many other Israelis would have liked to fight against Hamas.
Do you think, as Yuval Noah Harari has said, that he fears for the soul of Israel? And I wonder whether you think, given you've seen with your own eyes these selfies that Israeli soldiers are taking of themselves in Gaza, do you think that, you know, this is, I guess, diminishing the self-proclaimed notion of the most moral army in the world?
I will not call any army in the world the most moral army in the world. I think that this is a doomed kind of competition. I do think that Israel, the Israel that I have grown up in, that I have known, that I have loved, that I still love, this kind of Israel has attempted in the best possible way to diminish the suffering of both ourselves and our enemies, and certainly our enemies, civilians and innocents. Gaza has innocent people. Not all civilians are innocent, unfortunately, but we cannot tell the difference when we fight. And hence, all civilians deserve to be protected as best we can. I think that in this war, we have partially failed in doing that, although we have been trying. The IDF has attempted to diminish the danger to civilians, not always successfully, and sometimes preferring the safety of our own soldiers to the safety of local civilians. It is a complicated case. It is a set of horrible moral dilemmas. And I certainly wish that another leadership, another prime minister, another kind of war cabinet would have been running this war. Not that previous wars were paradisical, but this war is among the worst, perhaps the ugliest, perhaps the dirtiest that we ever had to fight. And still, Christiane, I have to say that we have to defeat Hamas, not disregarding the moral dilemmas, but doing our best, which we haven't, unfortunately, but trying to keep doing our best for the innocent, for the uninvolved.
How many Israelis do you think share that opinion? Because I know that the overwhelming majority of Israelis believe in this war. And as you say, the overwhelming majority of Israelis also do not believe in the leadership of Benjamin Netanyahu, your current prime minister.
Well, first of all, let me say, and this is a caveat that I have to make absolutely clear, that unlike the rest of the world who is watching us on the screens and moralizing from the armchair, we are a battered nation right now. We are not only heartbroken, so heartbroken that sometimes it's difficult to be heartbroken for the civilians on the enemy side. We are also mind-boggled, shocked, humiliated. Very few Israelis would admit that, but we might as well say that we also feel humiliated, terribly saddened, and terribly scared, with a sense of an ongoing crisis, the worst in our history for sure, and an ongoing sense of tragic loss. I'm saying that this not only in order, not in order to play the victim's card. I don't believe in playing a victim's card, but I do believe that many of us have been truly victimized on the 7th of October, and of course the hostages are still suffering a horrible, horrible fate. I'm wearing, like so many Israelis do now, the Bring Them Home token. Yeah. And our heart, as it says, is captive in Gaza. We are not being totally rational now. I don't think that we are sitting here, most of us, apart perhaps from a few very strong women and men, most of us are not weighing the moral options and necessities in a totally rational way because we are deeply, deeply involved. Hurt, injured, surprised in a negative way beyond the capacity of many people to take up complications, nuances, to understand or to try to imagine the other side. And having said that, I think that many Israelis believe that we should have had a humanitarian ceasefire and hostage exchange, another ceasefire and hostage exchange months ago. So alongside the fear and the sadness and the shock, there is also a mounting sense of anger among the Israeli population against our own leadership, our coalition government, and especially our prime minister.
You know, it's just so interesting to hear you say that. And I just want to, at this point, bring in an interview that I did with your own father, the great novelist Amos Oz, in 2010, with a Palestinian lawyer by the name of Elias Khoury, whose own son was killed by a Palestinian gunman, in fact. But this is what your father said to us about the story of the other, about the eventual day after, about the eventual solution. And I just want to play this and see what you say.
You know, it's difficult to be a prophet coming from the land of the prophets, but let me give you one prophecy. One day there will be a Palestinian embassy in Israel and an Israeli embassy in Palestine, and those two embassies will be walking distance from one another because one of them will be in East Jerusalem and the other one in West Jerusalem.
So, Fania, that was in 2010, 14 years ago.
Yes.
When you hear that,
oh yes,
is that an extinguished hope, or is that a hope that this horror has relit? What do you think?
Well, my father had two kinds of hopes. I would not be a loyal daughter if I didn't sometimes disagree with him, but he believed that peace is possible in our day and age, and he also believed in the two-state solution. I, unfortunately, cannot use the word peace very easily after the 7th of October. I will not have peace with the brutes of Gaza, and I'm not talking about all Gazans, of course, but about Hamas and its supporters. Not in this generation, perhaps not in the next. But I do strongly believe that the two-state solution is alive. It is the one-state solution, the idea that we will all live happily ever after, as fellow citizens in one, as people demand, a liberal, secular state that I think is a fantasy for this day and age. But I believe strongly, as my father did, that the two-state solution in reasonable neighborhood, perhaps not love, perhaps not full peace, perhaps not friendship, but reasonable neighborhood, across a solid fence this time, should work and is in fact the only viable solution for the future of both Israel and Palestine.
And your father described himself as a peacenik, not a pacifist. What do you think he meant by that? And do you feel that as well?
Well, I remember him expanding on this, and yes, I feel the same. I'm certainly not a pacifist, because a pacifist is the kind of person who, facing aggression, would lay down and die, or run away, or leave the country, as some people across the globe demand of us, to leave our homeland and go back where? To the Jewish past, to the Holocaust. I do believe that Israel should have a strong army. I'm proud that I also served as a soldier and an officer in the Israeli army many years ago. And I think that this army is the only thing keeping us from being exterminated as a people and as a country in this part of the Middle East.
Why do you think it is the creatives, the writers, the artists like yourself and the others in Israel who are beginning to have this open discussion now?
Because writers, Christiane, and creators and artists are people who have already been injured. You do not become a great artist if you do not have a wounded soul. And having a wounded soul usually means that you understand and empathize with the wounds of others. You are, as my father used to say, capable of imagining the other. Having said that, no, it is not only the writers and the artists who are coming forward to speak about the humanity of the other side and, of course, our own humanity that needs to be preserved. Many parts of Israeli civil society, including the veterans of the pro-democracy movement of last year, many good people in this country, most part of the Arab citizens of Israel, the Israeli Palestinians, my fellow citizens here, and much of the liberal and centrist, left and central liberals, are people who would be willing to talk reason and to see reason and to move towards an international guarantee agreement that is towards hope. So yes, the artists, the writers, the poets may be leading the way, but a lot of good souls in this country, which has not lost its soul as yet, a lot of good souls will be able to chime in and to take part when a true process begins. Again, perhaps not peace in our time, perhaps not reconciliation in an emotional sense, but a rational agreement, leaving Israel within defensible borders and a strong democracy, alongside a viably stable Palestine, is the only way we can move forward, and this means hope. So yes, I still follow my father and many other great Israeli women and men in the general hope for the future of all of us here, of this wonderful Tel Aviv, whose lights are twinkling behind me. There is hope, and we shall keep it up.
Well, we are happy to hear you voice that hope. Fania Oz Salzberger, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.